On Black Friday, we decided to opt outside at Port Royal State Park near Clarksville, Tennessee.
My name's John. Thanks for coming today. I appreciate it. Wasn't sure if anybody was going to show up. So, have y'all ever been to Port Royal before? Okay. So, like I said a minute ago, you're at the second smallest state park in Tennessee, 29 acres. Pretty much what you're looking at right here is half the park. Port Royal is set aside to be a park because it was one of the earliest communities in Tennessee. There were European settlers in this area going all the way back to the late 1700s. So at that time, Tennessee, and this is kind of the western frontier. There's not a whole lot of Europeans that have moved past this area.
Yeah, I was wondering how in the world they got here at that time.
They were just walking. So the first Europeans that were coming through here were the long hunters. The guys that were going out from the eastern colonies in western North Carolina and those areas. And they were called long hunters because they would go on really long hunts. They would come over into these areas, the wilderness of the frontier, and spend several months trapping and hunting to collect pelts, mainly, that they could then take back east and sell, or try to take down to New Orleans. That being one of the main kind of commerce ports in the North American continent at the time. But over time, they started to develop what were called station camps. And these were essentially just a place that they would return to year after year so that they could kind of have a base of operations. And one of those station camps was right here in this area of Port Royal. There were several others within a relatively small vicinity of here as well. But over time, a lot of those station camps would develop into small towns as more and more people kind of made their way westward. So Port Royal started to become the town of Port Royal towards the very end of the 1700s. Moving forward into the early 1800s is really when Port Royal was at its most prominent. So again, at that time, it is one of the only sort of towns and cities that are in Tennessee. You could look up a list of large communities. When I say large, like 1,000, 2,000 people. In the early 1800s, Port Royal is one of them. Nashville is one of them. Jonesboro in East Tennessee is one of them. Greenville, I believe, is there in East Tennessee. There really weren't that many. So Port Royal is named for Port Royal in South Carolina. I'm not sure exactly who was the one that picked that name for this, but as you can imagine, one of the reasons that Port Royal was sort of established in this particular area is we have the Red River right now, where we have gained our independence. The main economic drivers of the country are agriculture. And this is before the time of a lot of developed roads. There's obviously no interstates or anything like that. So the main thoroughfares are the rivers. So that's why you have all these big prominent towns that are popping up. They're always located on a body of water. Port Royal is no different. The Red River we have right here, about 20 miles downstream, it joins the Cumberland River, which joins the Ohio River, which joins the Mississippi River, which obviously dumps into the Gulf of Mexico. So from right here, you could theoretically, well, not theoretically, you can. It'll be a little more difficult than it was in the early 1800s with dams and things of that nature, but you could put a boat in right here and float all the way to the Gulf of Mexico. And that ability is what drew people here. So we have in the early 1800s, the 18 teens, the 1820s, the community is starting to build up around that economy. So yeah, y'all can see here, this was the structure that was sitting on top of this foundation up until the 1970s. And it was originally, it was a stagecoach inn. It was also a home. There's a local gentleman who comes by the park all the time. His grandfather lived here, and he remembers going to the house, and it was damaged, believe it or not, over the years by floodwaters. So just imagine that. You have a house right here. I've heard stories of people, the gentleman that I was just talking about, he's told me stories of standing on these rocks and catching bass because the water was so high.
Well,
Signed in 1830 by Andrew Jackson, Tennessean. Doesn't actually start to happen until 1838, 1839. That's when all of these natives start being forcefully removed and taken out west. And one of those routes came right through the town of Port Royal. The original road, which we're standing on right now, this is a part of the Trail of Tears. We have across the river there in the other part of our property that I talked about a little while ago, a certified section of the Trail of Tears that is about 300 yards long. If y'all go over there and kind of stand on it, you can, if you take into account the tragedy that occurred there, it's a pretty special place to stand and just kind of think about what those people would have gone through. This would have been one of the, if not the last place that they would have spent the night in the state of Tennessee before moving into Kentucky and further west. But the trail would have come up. The original road is actually directly in front of the brick building right there, right in front of the porch. It came across what is the highway now. That wasn't a road at the time. Obviously this bridge wasn't here, and they would have come right down through the main street of Port Royal. And as you can see here, this sort of curve built up going to this iron bridge didn't exist. That bridge was built in the 1890s. So the original road, based off of what we have discerned, I say we, mainly my boss, who is very well versed in the history of Port Royal. He's from this area. Really smart guy. He's done a lot of research based off some historical maps and some town plats that actually show the different property lines and the parcels. We think the road curved around here and then came down to the river, kind of around here where our boat ramp is. And this was a ford where for hundreds and hundreds of years, humans and animals for thousands of years have been fording the river. They would have had to cross here, and then you can kind of see just to the left of this pylon, kind of behind this little clump of trees, there's a little, what looks like a little ravine on the side of the river. That is where the original ford would have come up out of the river. And now it looks very different from siltation and floods and everything, but that's pretty much where they would have come out and gone up and continued north into Kentucky. And we know that 11 detachments of Indians came through here. One of them was a voluntary group, people that left on their own accord. That was a very small group, about 200. The other 10 averaged about 1,000 people apiece. So you have, over the course of 2 years, 10,000 people that are walking through Port Royal. And this would have been one of the places that they stopped to camp in this general area. We have a letter from one of the leaders of one of these detachments where he talks about getting grain from the Port Royal mill, which is located just upstream this way, outside of the actual park boundary. So we know that they camped somewhere in this general area. We don't know exactly where, but based off of the geography, we can make an educated guess that there's a pretty good probability that it would have been somewhere just on the other side of that river. And that would have been to think of it in our terms as identifying as Tennesseans or Missourians, or this would have been the last place that they spent the night in the state of Tennessee, in their home state. This particular little outcrop has very obviously been quarried off to use for foundation stones. Now it's possible that some of the stones that are right over there on that building came from right here. And then when you think about the way these people lived without electricity or power tools and building the foundation of a home, how much skill was required to shape these rocks, even in a rough sense, to be able to stack up and then build a structure on top of. The engineering skills that these people possess never cease to amaze me. It's stuff that I think a lot of us would struggle to do nowadays. This bridge behind us, I mentioned earlier, it wasn't actually built there until the 1890s, but we think that some of the pylons the bridge is sitting on actually date back to much earlier in the 1800s. But this creek here is called the Sulphur Fork, and this would have also had some flatboat traffic where people could bring their goods down. More than likely you would have had farmers who were building their own boats and maybe floating it to here and then unloading their goods and selling it, and then they're going home. There were some farmers that would build their own boats and float it all the way down to New Orleans. That way they're going to keep 100% of their profits, but they're also taking 100% of the risk in doing so, when the safe bet would be to just sell it here locally, get your store credit, which is really all you need to get the goods necessary to continue living, and not have to worry about the dangers of floating down this river.
We would like to thank Port Royal Park Ranger John for showing us around and telling us so much history of Port Royal State Park. We are happy that we got to opt outside with him that day. Until next time, this is Kay and Matt from Happy Trails Hiking. Thanks for watching.